So looking at that comprehensive legal political framework in terms of economic relations, next comes the fiscal relations. And how do we implement fiscal relations? Not through the contributions to bans process that you're implementing and the budget that you're implementing that restricts the comprehensive budgeting that you need to make and implement. And when I talk about that budgeting, I'm talking about a process that implements a total budgeting strategy. And for every line you see on this budget, there's a comprehensive budget that's needed. Right now, you're lucky if you're budgeting for 1/3 of this total budget that you're looking at. I showed it to Mark Miller before he lost his post from Crown Indigenous Relations. I said, this is what you budget for to maintaining your standard of living in Canada and to finance all your governments. And that money is in your parliament today. And you only have 17% of that money for applying to Indians, Métis, and Inuit nationally. When you look at this budgeting strategy that I'm showing you here, you have 100% of the funding available in Parliament. And you're now providing that money to the federal government to maintain your standard of living through programs and services and political funding. But you're also providing the same money and budgeting strategy to your 10 provincial governments, 2 territorial governments, one Nunavut government, and 4,000 urban rural municipalities across Canada. And your taxpayer dollar doesn't cover that cost. You're the taxpayer bums, not us. And your taxpayer dollar, you can keep it because that doesn't even afford you providing the money you need to finance the political governing bodies at all those levels. So I don't know what you're concerned with when we're entitled to benefit from the same resources that you collect from revenue off resources that we're entitled to. And then you have a system of financing under your comprehensive legal jurisdiction and responsibility. We need to move from contributions to bans to government fiscal agreements. And that government fiscal agreement will provide for the recognition of that comprehensive budgeting that I just identified. And it'll call for direct transfers to our governments and our institutions and our individuals from the federal government to our governments. And the federal government will legislate special legislation recognizing our jurisdiction and our Finance Administration Act that provides for our capacity to implement our own budgets, our own fiscal relations, and our own financing of our governments. And you've been busy occupying the field with your jurisdiction and laws for your standard of living and the financing of your governments for the last 40 years in the billions, while we're still tinkering around with nickels and dimes in the millions. And I said 2 years ago I met with Privy Council and told them that. And told them that it's time we went to looking at budgeting and financing in the billions like you have to maintain your standard of living and financing of your governments. And they didn't hesitate to agree. But are we doing it? 2024? No, we're not. Instead, we're busy setting up corporate entities, provincial corporate entities in education authorities, provincial incorporated entities, health authorities, provincial corporate entities, tribal councils, provincial corporate entities, economic entities under provincial corporate law, in some cases under federal corporate law. Well, where is our own corporate law, certifying and registering our own corporations? Like I mentioned earlier, the capacity exists for us to do that and implement that. But when we set up our own Finance Administration Act, and I told them, you have your own Federal Finance Administration Act. When I was chief at home in 1972, that's the first thing I'd done, was passed our own Finance Administration Act and entered into a government-to-government fiscal agreement that I drafted based on my own knowledge of law and experience of enforcing laws. The regional people came out from Regina to my community and they said, we're not signing that, we can't. I said, bring your lawyer next week and let's see what happens. So they brought their lawyer, sitting across from me. He said, Chief, what did you want me here for? They didn't even tell him why they were bringing him. I said, well, for your information, we have our own Finance Administration Act here, and you have your own Federal Finance Administration Act, and I developed a draft government-to-government fiscal agreement between the federal government and the government of our community. Back then it was the James Smith Cree Nation. And I said, I'm told that they can't sign it. He said, let me see it. So I gave it to him. They didn't even give him a copy. So he reviewed it in about 20 minutes. He flipped it to the back page and he told them, sign it. Now what did that do? That gave me access then to all federal ministries and departments.